Liam felt the cold seep through his thin suit jacket, a damp chill that had nothing to do with the relentless autumn rain. It was a coldness that emanated from the people around him, the people he had once, foolishly, called family. He stood on the perfectly manicured lawn, the grass turning to mud under his worn shoes, and watched as the last of his life was unceremoniously ejected from the grand mansion that had never been his home. His wife, Clara, stood on the stone steps, her arms crossed, a portrait of cruel satisfaction. Her face, usually a mask of practiced social grace, was twisted with undisguised contempt. Beside her, her mother, Beatrice, looked on with an expression of profound distaste, as if witnessing the extermination of a common household pest. The final bag, a cheap canvas duffel, was thrown by Marcus, Clara's brother. It landed with a wet thud in a puddle near Liam's feet, splashing muddy water onto his trousers. The sound was a punctuation mark at the end of a long, miserable sentence that had been his marriage. "And stay out," Marcus sneered, wiping his hands on his expensive trousers as if he'd touched something filthy. His voice was thick with the arrogance of someone who had never known a day of genuine struggle. Liam said nothing. He simply stared at the closed door, the heavy oak a final, unyielding barrier between his past and his future. The rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, and a single, cold drop traced a path down his cheek, indistinguishable from a tear. He had just returned from his estranged father's funeral, a somber, lonely affair attended by only himself and a lawyer he had never met. Clara and her family had refused to go, of course. "Why would we pay our respects to some broke old hermit?" Beatrice had scoffed just that morning, her voice like cracking ice. "It's frankly embarrassing that you're even associated with him, Liam. Thank goodness that's finally over." Now, hours later, they had decided he was over too. His use to them, whatever it had been, had expired with his father's last breath. They had waited until he was at his most vulnerable, his grief still a raw wound, to deliver this final, devastating blow. He bent down slowly, his movements stiff, and picked up the duffel bag. The canvas was soaked through, the weight of his few belongings heavier than ever before. He clutched the strap, his knuckles white, the only outward sign of the storm raging inside him. In his pocket, his fingers brushed against a simple, crisp envelope. It was the only thing his father had left him, handed to him by the solicitor after the service. It felt thin, insignificant, holding perhaps a letter of apology or a few dollars to cover his bus fare. He had not yet opened it. "What are you waiting for?" Clara's voice cut through the downpour like a blade. "An invitation back inside? You're pathetic. Go on, get off our property before I call security." Our property. The words echoed in the hollow space where his heart used to be. For 10 years, he had worked tirelessly, pouring every ounce of his energy into supporting her, into trying to fit into her world of glittering surfaces and empty promises. He had taken on extra jobs, worked weekends, all so she could maintain the lifestyle she felt she was entitled to. A lifestyle this mansion represented. He had been a fool, a patient, hard-working fool. He turned without a word, the squelch of his shoes on the saturated lawn the only sound he made. He did not look back. He could feel their eyes on him, 3 pairs of cold, satisfied eyes, watching him trudge away into the rain like a stray dog being chased from a yard. The injustice of it all was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. They believed he was nothing, a piece of driftwood they had finally managed to dislodge from their pristine ship. They had no idea about the envelope in his pocket. He had no idea either, not really, But as he walked down the long, winding driveway, away from the mocking lights of the house, a tiny, unfamiliar spark ignited within him. It was not hope, not yet. It was something harder, colder. It was the first flicker of a fire that would one day consume their perfect, hollow world. They thought they had thrown him out into the storm, but they were wrong. They had just released the storm itself. Liam's life with Clara had been a masterclass in quiet endurance. He had met her a decade ago, a whirlwind of charm and dazzling smiles that had left him utterly captivated. He was a simple man, a freelance software developer who valued logic and hard work. She was, he thought, a vibrant soul who could teach him to enjoy the fruits of his labor. He had been wrong. Clara did not want to enjoy the fruits of his labor. She wanted to consume them, burn them for fuel to power her ascent up the social ladder. Her love was conditional, transactional. His worth was measured not by his character but by the balance of his bank account, section, and it was never enough. Her family, the formidable Beatrice and the indolent Marcus, had made their disdain for him clear from the beginning. Beatrice, the matriarch of their little dynasty built on her late husband's moderately successful real estate ventures, viewed Liam as a regrettable necessity. He was the stable, if unimpressive, workhorse who funded Clara's expensive tastes. "You must do something about your wardrobe, Liam," she would say, her eyes scanning his perfectly serviceable clothes with an expression of deep disappointment. "You look like a tradesman. Clara has a reputation to uphold." Marcus was more direct. He treated Liam with a casual cruelty that was somehow more wounding than his mother's calculated barbs. He would mock Liam's modest car, his lack of interest in polo, and his quaint belief in working for a living. "For still tapping away at that little computer of yours, eh, Liam?" Marcus would say, lounging by the pool with a cocktail in hand. "Don't you ever get tired of the grind? You should learn to invest, like me. Make your money work for you. Oh, wait, you don't have any money." The laughter that followed, sharp and mocking from Clara and Beatrice, was a familiar sound. It was the soundtrack to his marriage, the constant reminder of his status as an outsider in his own home. He had tolerated it, absorbed it, telling himself it was the price he had to pay for the woman he loved. He had believed for a very long time that beneath the shallow, status-obsessed exterior, the Clara he had first fallen for still existed. He had spent years trying to reach her, working harder and harder to give her the world she craved. He built a successful app on the side, sold it for a respectable sum, and put all the money into a down payment on the mansion she had always dreamed of. He thought it would be enough. It was not. The house simply became a bigger stage for their performances of wealth and his inadequacy. The mortgage was in his name, the bills were his responsibility, but it was always their property. His contributions were invisible, silently consumed by the great hungry machine of their lifestyle. His own father, a man he hadn't seen in nearly 20 years, was a source of particular shame for them. Thomas Vance was a brilliant but reclusive software engineer who had vanished from the corporate world after a bitter fallout with his business partners. He lived a life of deliberate obscurity, and Liam, respecting his father's wishes, had never pressed for a reconciliation. "A hermit," Beatrice would declare. "Your father is a penniless old hermit living in some shack. It's a stain on this family." Liam never defended him. He knew they wouldn't understand. The cruelty escalated over the years, becoming more brazen as they grew more confident in his passivity. They saw his quiet endurance not as a strength, but as a profound weakness. They believed he was a doormat, a man so terrified of losing Clara that he would accept any humiliation. They were right for a time. He had been terrified, but sitting in the sterile quiet of the solicitor's office after his father's funeral, that fear had begun to curdle into something else. The solicitor, a sharp, kind-eyed man named Alistair Finch, had looked at him with a strange sort of pity. "Your father was a very particular man," Mr. Finch had said, sliding the simple white envelope across the polished mahogany desk. "He left very specific instructions. This is for you, and you alone." Now, soaked and shivering on a park bench miles from the mansion, Liam finally pulled the envelope from his pocket. The paper was damp, but not ruined. His hands trembled slightly as he tore it open. Inside there was no letter. There was only a single, heavy, ornate key and a small, folded piece of paper. On the paper was an address in Zurich, Switzerland, the name of a private bank, a reference number, and a short, typewritten message. "They will mistake your quiet for weakness. Let them. Your true inheritance is not something they can comprehend. Use it wisely. Dad." Liam stared at the words, his father's voice a distant echo in his memory. He looked at the key, its design intricate and old-fashioned. It felt solid, real, in a world that had suddenly become fluid and uncertain. A mystery, a seed. He had no idea what it meant, what waited for him in a Swiss bank vault. It could be nothing. It could be a final, cryptic joke from a man he barely knew. But as he sat there in the rain, with his life in a wet duffel bag at his feet, it was the only thing he had. He remembered Clara's final words, her threat to call security. He thought of Beatrice's smug smile and Marcus's sneering face. Their overconfidence was absolute. They had discarded him because they believed, with every fibre of their being, that he was worthless. A slow, cold smile touched Liam's lips for the first time that day. It was a grim, unfamiliar expression on his face. They had built their entire world on a foundation of perceived superiority. They had no idea that foundation was about to be systematically, deliberately, and completely demolished. His investigation had just begun. The flight to Zurich was a blur of caffeine and nervous energy. Liam had used the last of his emergency savings, a small fund Clara and her family knew nothing about, to purchase the ticket. He sat in a cramped economy seat, the key from his father's envelope, a heavy, constant presence in his pocket. It felt like a stone, a weight pulling him toward an unknown destiny. He was a man adrift. The life he had known was gone, shattered in an instant, on a rain-slicked driveway. He had nothing to go back to, and only a cryptic note to go forward to. The feeling was terrifying, but it was also strangely liberating. For the first time in a decade, his choices were entirely his own. Zurich was a city of quiet, orderly wealth. The air was clean, the streets were immaculate, and the buildings exuded a sense of permanence and security. It was a world away from the loud, ostentatious luxury of Clara's life. This was old money, discreet and powerful. The bank was an imposing grey stone building with no name on its facade. Only a small, polished brass plaque next to the heavy oak doors indicated its purpose. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs as he approached. He felt like an imposter, a man in a cheap, off-the-rack suit about to walk into a sanctuary of the global elite. He presented the note and his identification to a severe-looking woman behind a marble counter. She examined them without a word, her expression unreadable. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, she picked up a telephone and spoke in quiet, rapid German. A few minutes later, a man in a perfectly tailored suit emerged from a back office. He was older, with silver hair and a calm, professional demeanor. He introduced himself as the bank director. "Mr. Vance," he said, his English precise and unaccented, "we have been expecting you. Please follow me." Liam was led through a series of silent, carpeted hallways and into a private viewing room. The room was opulent but understated, with panelled walls, leather armchairs, and a single, heavy mahogany table. The director gestured for him to sit. "Your father, Thomas Vance, was a client of this institution for many years," the director began, his tone respectful. "He was a man of great vision and even greater discretion. The arrangements he made were extensive." The director then used Liam's key, along with one of his own, to open a small, secure door in the wall. He retrieved a large, heavy metal box and placed it on the table in front of Liam. "What is in this box belongs to you now," the director said softly. "As per your father's instructions, I will leave you to review the contents in private. Please take all the time you need." With that, he bowed slightly and left the room, closing the door with a soft, definitive click. Liam was alone with the box. For a moment he just stared at it, his breath caught in his throat. This was it. The great revelation, the answer to the mystery that had brought him halfway around the world. With trembling hands he opened the latch. The lid was heavy. He lifted it, and his breath hitched. The box was filled to the brim with documents. Thick stacks of bond certificates, stock ledgers, and property deeds from all over the world. On top of it all was a single, sealed letter addressed to him in his father's handwriting. He opened the letter first. The words inside were simple, direct, and they changed his world forever. "Liam," it began, "I am sorry for my absence. I had to disappear to build this. After I was cheated by my old partners, I vowed I would never be vulnerable again. I created a new company, Orion Holdings, under a web of shell corporations and trusts. I built it in the shadows, quietly, patiently. It grew larger than I ever imagined." Liam's eyes scanned the page, his mind struggling to process the information. Orion Holdings? He had never heard of it. "Orion is now one of the largest private technology and investment conglomerates in the world," the letter continued. "It has no public face. Its assets are in the hundreds of billions, and now it is all yours. You are the sole owner, the sole director, the sole heir to everything I have built." Liam had to read the sentence 3 times. Hundreds of billions. The number was so vast, so astronomical, that it felt unreal. It was a figure from a movie, not something that could possibly relate to him, a man who had worried about making his mortgage payments. Paragraph. He dropped the letter and began to sift through the documents. He saw names of companies he recognized, major tech firms, energy giants, pharmaceutical companies. According to these papers, Orion Holdings held controlling stakes in all of them. It was an invisible empire, a financial leviathan moving silently beneath the surface of the global economy. He felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. This was the hidden power his father had spoken of. It wasn't just wealth, it was influence, control, the ability to shape markets and move mountains with a single phone call. Then his eyes fell on a smaller, separate portfolio within the box. It was labeled Tier 3 Subsidiary Investments. He opened it, his curiosity piqued. Inside was a file for a company called Invest Capital. The name struck a chord. He had heard Marcus boasting about it for years. Invest Capital was the boutique investment firm Marcus ran. It was the source of all the family's wealth, the foundation of their arrogant superiority. Liam's hands shook as he read the file. Invest Capital had only one major client, one significant investment that provided nearly 95% of its profits. That investment was in a tech startup called Ethelred Digital. He flipped through the Orion Holdings ownership documents until he found the corresponding file, and there it was, in black and white, a fact that made the air freeze in his lungs. Ethelred Digital was a wholly owned subsidiary of Orion Holdings. The irony was so staggering, so profoundly perfect, that he almost laughed out loud. For years, Marcus had been preening about his investment genius, his ability to pick a winner. In reality, he was nothing more than a parasite, feeding off a tiny, insignificant corner of the very empire Liam now controlled. Their entire world, the mansion, the luxury cars, the designer clothes, the social standing, was built on his father's legacy. They were unknowingly, completely and utterly dependent on him, the man they had just thrown out into the rain. The dizziness was gone, replaced by a feeling of absolute, chilling clarity. The shock and grief that had clouded his mind for days evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. He now understood the mechanism of his power. He saw the path forward, not as a vague hope, but as a precise, surgical procedure. He closed the box, his movements now steady and deliberate. The great revelation was complete. He was no longer Liam Vance, the long-suffering husband. He was the master of an unseen empire, and he was about to make a decision. He picked up the internal telephone on the table and asked for the bank director to return. When the man entered, Liam looked him directly in the eye, his voice even and controlled. "I need to be put in touch with my father's primary legal counsel immediately," he said. "A Mr. Alistair Finch. I believe we have a great deal of work to do." The decision point arrived not with a thunderclap, but in the quiet, wood-panelled office Alistair Finch kept in London. Liam had flown there directly from Zurich, the contents of the metal box now digitized and secured, the original documents returned to the vault. He felt like a different person. The hesitant, downtrodden man who had left home just days ago was gone, replaced by someone with a purpose, as sharp and clear as a shard of glass. Alistair Finch was more than just a solicitor. Liam now understood he was the operational right hand of the Orion Empire, the loyal facilitator who had managed Thomas Vance's affairs for decades. He greeted Liam not with pity, but with a deep, abiding respect. "I knew this day would come," Alistair said, his voice warm. "Your father always believed in you, Liam. He said you had a core of steel that most people overlooked. He said you just needed a reason to find it." Liam nodded. The words a balm on a wound he hadn't known was still there. "He gave me a reason," he replied, his tone flat and cold. He laid out the situation with Clara and her family. He didn't embellish or complain. He simply stated the facts of the past decade, culminating in the final, humiliating act of being thrown out in the rain. Alistair listened patiently, his expression hardening with each detail. "Their firm Innovest Capital," Liam said, getting to the heart of the matter. "It's entirely dependent on Ethelred Digital." "That is correct," Alistair confirmed, pulling up a complex organizational chart on a large screen in his office. He pointed to a small box at the very bottom of a sprawling network of companies. "Ethelred is a non-core asset, a small research subsidiary we use for speculative projects. To Orion, its value is negligible, a rounding error. To Innovest Capital, it is everything." This was the moment, the decision. He could walk away, take his billions and disappear, leaving them to their ignorant, parasitic existence. He could live a life of unimaginable luxury and never think of them again. That would be the sensible, rational choice. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Clara's smug face. He heard Marcus's mocking laughter. He felt the cold rain on his skin and the sting of utter humiliation. Justice was not about walking away. Justice was about balance. It was about making them feel the same powerlessness they had inflicted on him for so long. "I want to dismantle it," Liam said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Ethelred Digital, I want you to help me formulate a plan to completely and legally bankrupt Innovis Capital and, by extension, my wife and her family." Alistair did not flinch. He did not question the morality of the decision. He simply gave a slight, decisive nod. "Your father built Orion Holdings to be a fortress, but also a weapon. It is designed for precisely this kind of surgical financial action. The plan will be elegant, and it will be devastating." What followed was a strategy session that lasted for hours. Alistair brought in two of Orion's top financial strategists, discreet, razor-sharp individuals who spoke in the clipped, precise language of high finance. They treated Liam with the deference due to the sole owner of the empire, listening to his objective and then laying out the tools at his disposal. The nature of the plan was multifaceted. It was not a simple matter of pulling funding. It was to be a death by 1,000 cuts designed to maximize their confusion, panic, and ultimate ruin. First, one of the strategists explained, "We initiate an internal audit of Ethelred Digital. A routine but thorough one. This will allow us to discover certain financial irregularities in their reporting. Nothing illegal, just creative accounting that will need to be corrected. The correction will slash their projected profits for the next quarter. This will trigger a covenant breach in the lending agreements Innovis Capital has with its creditors," the other strategist added. "Marcus will suddenly find his credit lines frozen. The banks will start getting nervous." Simultaneously, Alistair continued, taking over, "Orion will begin quietly selling off Ethelred's key patents to a third-party shell corporation also owned by us. We will effectively gut the company of its value, hollowing it out from the inside. On paper, Ethelred will still exist, but its intellectual property, its only real asset, will be gone." The final step was the most brutal. Once the company is a hollow shell and the markets have been spooked by the revised profit forecasts, the first strategist said, Orion Holdings will announce it is divesting from the entire sector Ethelred operates in. We will sell our stake for pennies on the dollar, signaling to the world that the company is worthless. The stock will collapse. Innovis Capital will be wiped out in a single trading session. It was a perfect, merciless plan. It used the complex legal machinery of the financial world as a weapon. It was untraceable back to Liam. To the outside world, it would look like a simple case of a bad investment, of Marcus's supposed genius finally failing him. Liam listened to it all, a cold calm settling over him. He was not just seeking revenge. He was rebalancing the scales. He was imposing consequences for a decade of cruelty. "How do we begin?" Liam asked. Alistair slid a single document across the desk. It was a formal directive authorizing the internal audit of Ethelred Digital. It required only one signature. Liam picked up the heavy fountain pen Alistair offered him. He thought of his father's note. "They will mistake your quiet for weakness." His quiet days were over. He signed his name at the bottom of the page. The ink was dark and final. "The initiation has begun," Alistair said, taking the document. "The first domino is now officially falling." The first domino fell on a Tuesday. Marcus was in his gleaming minimalist office, feet propped up on his desk, boasting to a subordinate about a recent golf game. He saw himself as a master of the universe, a financial prodigy whose success was preordained. His entire business model consisted of pouring his family's money into Ethelred Digital and collecting the handsome returns. He called it vision. His phone rang, displaying the name of his primary contact at Ethelred. He answered it with a sigh of bored indulgence. "What's the good word?" he said. The voice on the other end was strained, panicked. "Marcus, we have a problem, a big one. The parent company, Orion, they've initiated a full-spectrum audit. They're crawling all over our books." Marcus's feet hit the floor with a thud. An audit? Why? We're their best-performing asset in that sector. I don't know. It came out of nowhere. They're saying something about standard financial review. But this feels different. They're questioning everything, every projection, every expense report. It's a nightmare. Disbelief was Marcus's first reaction. This was an inconvenience, a bureaucratic hassle. He ended the call with a few dismissive reassurances and tried to put it out of his mind. But a seed of unease had been planted. 2 days later, the seed sprouted. He received a formal notification. Due to preliminary audit findings, Ethelred Digital was revising its quarterly profit forecast downward by 70%. The number was so catastrophic he thought it had to be a typo. Panic began to set in. He called his sister, Clara, his voice an octave higher than usual. "Something's wrong with the Ethelred numbers. They're tanking the forecast. I don't understand what's happening." Clara, who was at a charity luncheon, was more annoyed than concerned. "Well, fix it, Marcus," she snapped, her voice a low whisper. "This is what you do. Just call your people and make it go away. I have appearances to maintain." But Marcus couldn't fix it. The next morning, the real cascade began. His phone started ringing before dawn. It was his broker. The forecast revision had triggered a covenant breach. His firm's multi-million-dollar credit line was frozen, effective immediately. Then came the call from the bank demanding a meeting to discuss the viability of their loans to Innovest Capital. The news hit the financial wires. The stock price of Ethelred, which was privately traded but still had a market value, began to plummet in secondary markets. Marcus was getting margin calls. He needed to find millions of dollars in cash immediately to cover his positions. He went to his mother. Beatrice was in her private sitting room, planning a lavish gala. She listened to his frantic explanation with a frown of irritation, as if he were a servant complaining about a leaky faucet. "What do you mean there's no money?" she demanded. "We are not people who run out of money. This is your entire job, Marcus, to make sure the money never stops. The investment is collapsing." "I don't know why," he yelled, his composure shattering. "I need you to liquidate the emergency funds, all of them." Beatrice's face went pale. "That's not possible. I've already committed most of that to the deposits for the gala, the caterers, the orchestra, the venue. Cancelling now would be social suicide." The reaction phase was predictable and chaotic. They turned on each other, their alliance, built on greed and arrogance, crumbling under the first sign of pressure. Beatrice blamed Marcus's incompetence. Marcus blamed Beatrice's frivolous spending. Clara blamed them both for threatening her lifestyle. From a quiet, furnished apartment in London that Alistair had arranged for him, Liam watched the collapse. He received daily updates, concise and dispassionate reports on the state of their financial ruin. He maintained a facade of silence. He had blocked their numbers, but he knew they had tried to call, their initial angry demands likely turning into desperate pleas. He felt a strange detachment, like a scientist observing an experiment. He had set the variables, initiated the reaction, and was now simply watching the inevitable outcome. There was no joy, no triumphant gloating. There was only a cold, quiet sense of order being restored. The final blow came a week after the first phone call. Orion Holdings issued a press release. It was a bland, corporate statement announcing a strategic pivot away from speculative tech research. As part of this new strategy, it was divesting its entire portfolio in that sector, including its subsidiary, Ethelred Digital. The company was sold to an anonymous buyer for a symbolic $1. The message to the financial world was clear and brutal. Ethelred Digital was worthless. The next day, Innovest Capital was declared insolvent. The firm that was the bedrock of their world, the symbol of their superiority, had ceased to exist. The cascade was complete. Their credit cards were declined. Their assets were frozen. The foreclosure notice for the mansion was in the mail. Liam sat by the window looking out at the calm London street. He remembered standing on their lawn in the pouring rain, a discarded object of their contempt. They had believed they were all-powerful and he was nothing. They had failed to understand a fundamental law of nature. Even the tallest tree can be brought down by an axe striking its roots. And he had just struck the final blow. The setting for the final confrontation was perfect in its poetic justice. It was the mansion, but it was not the gleaming palace of their pride any longer. It was a house in its death throes. A large moving truck was parked in the driveway, and men in overalls were carrying out furniture, artwork, and all the trappings of a life that was now over. The foreclosure had been swift and merciless. The bank that had so eagerly financed their extravagant lifestyle was just as eager to reclaim its collateral. Clara, Beatrice, and Marcus stood on the lawn where they had cast Liam out, their faces a mixture of disbelief, fury, and raw panic. They were surrounded by the wreckage of their lives. Liam arrived in a sleek, black car that purred to a stop at the end of the driveway. He didn't get out immediately. He just watched them for a moment, observing the three people who had made his life a misery. They looked smaller now, stripped of their power and prestige. They were just angry, frightened people. His driver opened the door and Liam stepped out. He wore a bespoke suit that fit him perfectly, a quiet statement of a world they could no longer access. He walked toward them, his steps measured and calm, the sound of his expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel. They saw him, and for a second there was only stunned silence. Then Clara found her voice. "Liam!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You have to help us! The bank is taking everything! There's been a terrible mistake with Marcus's business." Marcus, his face pale and unshaven, took a step forward. "This is your fault," he accused, his voice trembling with rage. "This all started after you left. What did you do?" Beatrice, ever the matriarch, tried to regain control, her voice dripping with condescending authority. "Liam, stop this foolishness. I don't know what game you're playing, but our family is in crisis. You are still Clara's husband. You have a duty. You will call your bank, and you will give us whatever money you have." Liam stopped a few feet from them. He looked at each of them in turn, his gaze cold and penetrating. The fear and deference they were so used to seeing in his eyes was gone, replaced by an unnerving calm. "No," he said. The single word hung in the air, sharp and final. "What did you say?" Beatrice sputtered, her face flushing with anger. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the culmination of his plan. He was ready to deliver the monologue that would tear down the final vestiges of their delusion. "I said no," he repeated, his voice even. "There has been no mistake. And this is not a game." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You spent 10 years treating me like I was nothing," he began, his voice low, but carrying with absolute clarity. "You treated me like dirt under your shoes, a convenience, a wallet to be emptied for your ridiculous, empty lifestyle. You thought my quiet nature was weakness. You thought my patience was stupidity." He took a step closer. "You stood right here, on this lawn, and you threw my life into a puddle while you laughed. You felt powerful. You felt superior. But what you didn't know was that your entire world, this house, the cars, the money you so arrogantly flaunted, was all built on a foundation of my family's making." Their faces were a canvas of confusion. Clara's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "Invest capital," Liam said. looking directly at Marcus, who flinched as if struck. Your brilliant firm, it was a parasite, Marcus. It survived by feeding on one single company, Ethelred Digital. He let that name hang in the air. And what you didn't know, what you couldn't possibly comprehend in your monumental arrogance, is that Ethelred Digital was a tiny, insignificant part of a much larger corporation. A corporation founded and owned by the penniless old hermit you so enjoyed mocking. The realization began to dawn on their faces, a slow, dawning horror that was more satisfying than any shouting match could ever be. My father's company, Orion Holdings, owned Ethelred, Liam continued, his voice relentless. And upon his death it passed to me. I became the sole owner of the company that your entire fortune depended on. The man you threw out into the rain was, in fact, your landlord, your employer, and your banker, all rolled into one. Beatrice staggered back, her hand flying to her throat. No, it's not possible. Oh, it's very possible, Liam said with a cold smile. I made one phone call, Beatrice. I signed one piece of paper. I initiated an audit. I restructured the assets, and I sold off the hollow shell of that company for $1. I didn't destroy you. I simply stopped paying for your lifestyle. The rest you did to yourselves. Clara finally broke down, a wretched, sobbing mess. Liam, please, she begged, stumbling toward him. I'm sorry, I didn't know. We can fix this. I'm still your wife. Liam looked at her, at the woman he had once loved, and felt nothing but a vast, empty distance. No, you're not, he said softly. Our marriage ended on this lawn. The divorce papers will be delivered to whatever homeless shelter you end up in. The final act had arrived. He turned his back on them, on their tears and their futile threats. He walked back toward his car. You can't just walk away, Marcus screamed after him. Where will you go? Liam paused at the open car door. He turned his head slightly. The day you threw me out, he said, his voice carrying easily over the distance. You assumed I had nowhere to go. You were wrong. A private jet was waiting for me. It was waiting to take me to my new life, the life you inadvertently gave me. He got into the car without another word. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing them out of his world for good. As the car pulled away, he saw them in the rearview mirror, 3 broken figures standing amidst the ruins of their own making. Their breakdown was complete. His vindication was absolute. In the year that followed, the downfall of the family was total and public. The collapse of Innovest Capital triggered an investigation that uncovered years of Marcus's fraudulent reporting and shady dealings. He was charged, convicted, and sentenced to 5 years in prison for financial crimes. His arrogance crumbled on the witness stand, replaced by the pathetic whining of a man who refused to take responsibility. Beatrice's social world evaporated overnight. Her name became a punchline in the circles she once dominated, a cautionary tale of hubris and ruin. Without money to fund her galas or her lifestyle, her powerful friends abandoned her. She was forced to sell the last of her jewelry and move into a small, bleak apartment, a bitter, lonely woman haunted by the ghost of her former status. Clara fared the worst. Stripped of her husband, her money, and her social standing, she was left with nothing but her own empty character. She tried to latch on to other wealthy men, but her desperation and the scandal surrounding her family made her toxic. She drifted, working a series of low-paying retail jobs she was consistently fired from, unable to cope with a world that didn't revolve around her. Liam never saw them again. He didn't need to. He had left them to the consequences of their own actions, which was the most profound justice of all. He finalized the divorce quickly and quietly, his immense resources making the process seamless. He did not, however, embrace the extravagant lifestyle he could have. His father's fortune was a tool, not a toy. He poured his energy and a significant portion of his wealth into creating the Vance Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to funding and mentoring promising tech startups founded by individuals from underprivileged backgrounds. He wanted to give others the chance he had almost been denied. He established a state-of-the-art training center, a gleaming building of glass and steel designed to be a hub of innovation and opportunity. It was his new home, his new purpose. He found more satisfaction in seeing a young entrepreneur's idea come to life than he ever could have from owning a yacht or a sports car. It was at the training center that he met Sarah. She was the lead architect who had designed the building, a woman with a quick, intelligent smile and a passion for her work that matched his own. Their relationship developed slowly, built not on status or wealth, but on mutual respect, shared values, and a quiet, genuine affection. She saw him for who he was, not for what he owned. One evening they stood on the rooftop terrace of the foundation building, looking out over the city lights. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, a comfortable silence between them. "You seem so at peace," she said softly. "Like you figured something important out." Liam thought back to the man shivering in the rain, his life in a soaked duffel bag. He thought of the cold fury that had driven him, and the eventual quiet satisfaction of justice served. He had won, but the victory itself wasn't what had healed him. "I learned that true power isn't about how much you have or what you can take from others," he said, his voice thoughtful. "It's about what you can build. It's about creating value where there was none before." He had taken the pain and injustice inflicted upon him and transformed it into a force for good. He had created a legacy that had nothing to do with the billions in his bank account and everything to do with the lives he was now able to change for the better. True wealth is not measured in dollars or stock portfolios, but in purpose and integrity. The cruelest people are often the most fragile, their power an illusion built on the backs of others. Once that foundation is removed, they simply collapse into the nothingness they always were. Liam had found his true worth not in a Swiss vault, but in the quiet, steady work of building a better world, one person at a time. He was finally free.